Part 1. The Seal Breaks. Episode 1. Dead Women Don't Breathe. The manuscript arrived on a Tuesday, which Emilia Crane would later decide was suspicious in itself. Nothing that changed your life should arrive on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were for bad coffee and overdue library fines. And the particular misery of realizing you'd scheduled a 9 a.m. seminar with Dr. Harwick, who smelled permanently of pipe tobacco and disappointment. But it came on a Tuesday, wrapped in acid-free paper and sealed in a conservation box that someone had stamped "Handle with extreme caution" in red ink. As if the scholars at Dunmore University needed reminding. As if any of them had ever handled anything carelessly in their lives. Emilia signed for it at the archive desk at 8:30 in the morning, still wearing yesterday's sweater, her dark hair pulled back with a pencil she'd forgotten about. The conservation box was heavier than it looked. She carried it to her workstation in the back of the rare manuscripts room, set it down between her cold coffee and her color-coded index of the Thornmere monastery destruction records. Inside, swaddled in tissue, a book. No, not a book. Books had spines and publishers and ISBNs, and a reasonable expectation of existing. This was something older than books. It was a manuscript, hand-bound in leather that had gone the color of a bruise over centuries. Its pages thick as skin, and yellowed at the edges to the precise shade of old teeth. The binding was stitched in a thread she didn't recognize. Something that caught the archive's fluorescent light and gave it back wrong, slightly darker than it should have been. She pulled on her cotton gloves and opened it. The notation system stopped her cold. 12 years. Emilia had spent 12 years in medieval manuscript studies, and she could read Carolingian minuscule in her sleep. Could identify a Benedictine scriptorium by handwriting alone. Had once spent 4 hours identifying a single ink formulation from the mineral deposits left in a dried brushstroke. She knew notation systems the way other people knew their own address. She did not know this one. It was not Latin. It was not any variant of Old English, Old French, Middle Welsh, or any of the 17 other languages she could read with varying degrees of fluency. The symbols were not symbols she had ever cataloged, and she had cataloged thousands. Some of them looked almost like letters, the way shadows on a wall look almost like people. Familiar in outline, wrong in substance. She photographed every page. She cross-referenced every symbol against her databases. She ate a granola bar at her desk without tasting it, and forgot to drink the cold coffee entirely. And by the time the archive lights switched to their evening cycle dim, she had made exactly 0 progress on identifying the notation and approximately infinite progress on being obsessed. She called her father at 7 o'clock. "Dad, I found something." "You say that every week." His voice was warm and distracted, the way it always was when he was cooking. She heard the particular sizzle of onions hitting a pan. "Is this a 'I found something interesting' or a 'I found something that means I won't be home for dinner' something?" "Possibly both. Your brother wants to know if you're coming to his match Saturday." "Tell him yes. Tell him I'll try." "Dad, this manuscript, it came from the Harrow Monastery ruins, the ones that burned in 1349. A pause. The sizzling quieted. "The ones that burned in 1349 should be ash." "I know. So where did it come from?" "That," Emilia said, looking at the manuscript across the empty archive, "is a very good question." She stayed. Of course she stayed. She made a second coffee from the break room machine that tasted like warm regret, brought it back to her desk, and kept working. The archive building settled around her into nighttime silence, the particular quiet of a place that holds old things, weighted and watchful. By midnight, she had worked her way to the final page. The last page was different from the others. The symbols here were larger, more deliberate, pressed deeper into the vellum, as if written with great force or great fear, or both. And at the center of the page, dominating everything, a wax seal. It was the color of very old blood. The sigil pressed into it was unlike anything in her database. A circle containing what appeared to be a woman's profile,
hands raised, surrounded by what might have been roots or veins or cracks in stone, spreading outward from her body like she was the origin of them or the victim of them. It was impossible to tell which. Emilia leaned close. Under the archive light, the seal seemed to have a quality she couldn't name, a depth, as if the wax went further down than wax had any right to go. Her gloved finger touched the edge of it. Then, without entirely deciding to, she pressed. The seal broke. The wax split cleanly, precisely, as if it had been waiting for exactly this much pressure from exactly this particular hand. The candle she'd lit, she kept one on her desk, a habit from her undergraduate years, a small rebellion against fluorescent scholarship, went out without flickering. Not blown, simply out. The archive was dark. Emilia thought, I should turn on the light. She did not turn on the light. She was falling. Not falling the way you fall down stairs, lurching, catching, the brief comedy of almost. Falling the way you fall in dreams, where there is no ground to worry about, because the falling is the whole of the world. She fell, and the archive fell away, and time fell away, and the cold coffee and the pencil in her hair, and her father making onions and her brother's Saturday match all fell away, and there was only the dark and the feeling of her hands pressing a broken seal, and then stone. Cold stone beneath her palms, cold stone under her knees. She was on a floor made of large, uneven stones joined with old mortar, with the particular chill of a building that had never been warm. She raised her head. A room. Stone walls hung with tapestries that had faded to suggestions of their original colors. She could make out what might have been a hunting scene, or a battle, or perhaps both, because in the medieval imagination, they were often the same thing. A writing desk. A wardrobe standing slightly open, its contents rifled, fabric spilling from it like an interrupted confession. Drawers pulled open. Papers scattered. Books knocked from shelves. Someone had searched this room. Recently. Emilia got to her feet, and the first thing she noticed was that the feet were wrong. They were longer than her feet. The hands that she raised before her face were longer than her hands, the fingers more tapered, one of them bearing a ring of deep red stone that she had definitely not been wearing when she left the archive. The dress? She was wearing a dress, dark green wool. The skirt, substantial enough to qualify as architecture, was not her sweater and jeans. She walked to the mirror. Copper, not glass. A circle of polished metal mounted on the wall that gave back a reflection warmer and more forgiving than glass, but still sufficient. Still clear enough. The face in the mirror was not hers. High cheekbones. Her own were softer. Dark eyes. Her own were darker, but these were darker still, with an exhausted quality. A deep bruise of sleeplessness beneath them. A jaw set with old tension. A scar along the left jawline, thin and silver, from something that had happened long ago. Dark hair, pinned at the back of the neck, several pieces escaped and hanging. A face that Emilia had seen in an engraving, in a court record, in the appendix of her 3rd chapter, where she'd included illustrations of historical figures associated with the Thornmere purges. Seraphine Ashborne, royal chronicler, convicted traitor, executed 3 days ago. "Oh no," Emilia said. The voice that came out was not her voice. It was lower. It had an accent she recognized from no living place. She stood in the dead woman's body, in the dead woman's ransacked room, and did the only rational thing available to her, which was to very carefully not scream. When she had finished not screaming, she turned from the mirror.
That was when she saw it. On the back of the copper mirror, she had to tilt the frame away from the wall to read it, and her borrowed hands moved with a confidence she did not feel, as if they remembered the gesture. Written in something dark and long-dried, "Find the Vareth before they find the ledger." Emilia stared at those words for a long time. Then she straightened the mirror. She walked to the window. She looked out at a night sky over a city she should not have been able to recognize, and somehow did. Thornmere, the capital, the black spires of the castle against a moonlit sky, the smell of river water and coal smoke, and the particular muddy darkness of a medieval city at midnight. She pressed the borrowed hands against the cold glass. "Right," she said, in a voice that was not hers. "Right." She had no idea what she was doing. She was absolutely going to do it anyway. Episode 2. The Officer Who Lied. He came in the morning. Emilia had not slept. She had spent the hours between midnight and dawn doing what she did when she was frightened, which was the same thing she did when she was not frightened. She worked. She cataloged. She inventoried the ransacked room, making a mental list of what had been taken. Papers, most of the papers, anything written on. And what had been left. The books, the personal effects, a box of candles, 3 dresses, a pair of boots that fit the feet she was currently inhabiting with an ease she found unnerving. She found the hidden cavity in the wall behind the wardrobe by accident. She had pressed the stones looking for a clue, and one of them pressed back, and a small door the size of a bread box swung inward on a hinge so well oiled it made no sound. Inside? Nothing. Empty. Whatever had been in it was already gone, or had already been moved. By someone who knew this room very well. Someone who had come before the ransacking. She had taken the boots, her feet, Seraphine's feet, the feet that were currently hers, and walked the room and tried not to look too often at the mirror, and tried even harder not to think about what was happening to her real body, which was presumably slumped over a manuscript in a Boston archive, and going to be found by the cleaning staff in the morning in a state that was going to require many explanations she couldn't currently provide. She had found in the toe of one of the other boots a folded piece of paper. It was a list of names. 7 of them. None she recognized from her research, except the last. Dr. E. Mordain, royal physician. That name she knew. It appeared in 3 of the trial documents she'd cataloged the previous year. A character witness for the prosecution. A man who had testified, with apparent regret,
that Seraphine Ashborne had been behaving erratically in the months before her arrest, raving about conspiracies, making accusations without evidence. She had folded the paper and tucked it into the bodice of the green dress, which had a small interior pocket she found by feel, as if her borrowed hands had always known it was there. The knock at the chamber door came at the 7th hour. Emilia had been sitting at the writing desk, her hands folded, trying to look like a woman who had not recently fallen through time into somebody else's body.
She had rehearsed, in the small hours, how she might speak, lower, slower, with the weight of someone who had lived in this century all her life. She had practiced the cadence of the court records, the shape of Seraphine's reported speech. She had the door open before the second knock. The man in the corridor was tall, taller than she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. He wore the uniform of the Crown's internal guard, dark coat, silver buttons, the crest of Thornmere at his collar. His face was the kind of face that had been handsome and had since been weathered into something more interesting. Strong jaw, a scar at the temple that he'd had for long enough it was just part of him now. Eyes the precise gray of a sky considering whether to storm. He had a document in his hand. He looked at the document. He looked at her. He looked back at the document, which she understood immediately was a death certificate with her name on it. Lady Ashborne, he said. Captain, she said, because his rank was on his collar, and she had 12 years of reading insignia. A pause. The gray eyes moved over her face with the specific attention of a man who had been trained to observe and was currently observing something that required considerable effort to categorize. She held very still. She breathed at a normal rate. She kept her borrowed face arranged in an expression she hoped communicated something like dignified irritation at being disturbed. You were reported dead, he said. I am aware of what I was reported. By the physician himself, 3 days ago. And yet here I stand. She let the pause settle. Did you need something, Captain, or did you come to be surprised at me? He looked at her for a long time, long enough that a different woman might have broken under it, might have explained herself, might have filled the silence with something incriminating. Emilia had spent 12 years in university committees and academic arguments, and the particular social torture of departmental meetings. She could outweight anyone. Something moved in his face. Not suspicion exactly. Something more complicated than suspicion. I came to confirm the report, he said at last. And? Another pause. He folded the death certificate with the precise, deliberate movements of a man making a decision he hadn't planned to make. And I will return to the council and confirm that the chamber is empty. His voice was flat, professionally empty. Lady Ashborne died 3 days ago, as reported. Did she? Emilia said. She did. He held her gaze. I would suggest that she continue to remain so, for her own sake. He left without another word. She listened to his boots on the stone corridor until they were gone, and then she let out a breath she'd been holding since she opened the door. He had lied for her. He didn't know her. He didn't know what he was looking at. Some quality of confusion in his face had told her that clearly enough. He had looked at her and made a decision that went against his orders and his paperwork and his entire professional identity. And she didn't know why. She went back to the writing desk. She sat down. She pressed Seraphine's hands flat against the wood and felt the grain of it. Old oak, rubbed smooth by years of use. Through the stone floor, very faintly, she could feel the city, the weight of it, the age of it. A kingdom built on something she had spent her career cataloging from a safe distance of 600 years. She was no longer at a safe distance. 30 minutes later, the knock came again. She knew before she opened the door that it would be him,
the gray-eyed captain, who had lied to his employers and could not, apparently, leave it alone. He stood in the corridor with his hat in his hands, which she suspected was unusual for him, and said,
"The woman I reported dead. She would need to tell me something, I believe, in order for me to continue to report her that way. That seems fair," Emilia said. "So," he looked at her steadily. "Tell me something I'll believe." She considered him. She thought about Seraphine's name on the list of the condemned, thought about the ransacked room and the empty hidden cavity, and the name written in blood on the back of a mirror. She thought about a woman who had spent 12 years building a truth that was going to die with her, and had left that truth in the walls of this room, and had somehow, impossibly, reached across 6 centuries to find someone to carry it forward. She thought, what would Seraphine say? "Seraphine Ashborne was killed," she said, "because she found something that the people in this castle cannot afford to have found. She spent 12 years finding it. They had 3 days to search this room, and they didn't find what they were looking for, which means it is still here, or it has already been moved somewhere they can't reach." She held his gaze. "And the man who signed her death certificate did it to keep that something buried." Captain Aldrich Ashcroft looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is either a very dangerous thing to say, or the most dangerous thing I've heard in my career." "Both," she said. "I expect it's both." He didn't leave. He came inside. He sat in the chair she indicated, the hard one, not the cushioned one at the writing desk, because some impulse she didn't entirely understand wanted him slightly uncomfortable. He sat with his hat on his knee and his eyes on her face, and his expression doing something complex and effortful. And she thought, he is a good man trying to figure out what to do about it. She had known people like that. She had spent her career studying what happened to them. It didn't usually go well. "Start," he said, "from the beginning." So she did. Not all of it. Not the part about Boston, not the part about the archive, not the part about what she actually was and where she had actually come from. That would come later, when she had more of a foundation and more of his trust, and more certainty that he wouldn't have her burned for sorcery. But she told him what she knew of Seraphine. She told him what was written on the mirror. She told him about the names on the folded paper in the boot. When she said Dr. Mordane's name, something shifted in his face. "Mordane," he repeated. "You know him?" "Everyone at court knows him." The words were careful, too careful. "He's been the royal physician for 20 years. He testified at Seraphine's trial." He did. "He said she was unstable, raving about conspiracies." He did. "And?"
Aldrich looked at his hat. He turned it once in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes had the specific quality of someone who had noticed something a long time ago and had successfully convinced themselves not to notice it. Until right now. "There were things," he said slowly, "about the trial that didn't sit right." "Tell me," he told her. Outside the window, Thornmere moved through its morning. Carts on cobblestones, church bells, the smell of bread and river water. Inside the room that belonged to a dead woman, a royal officer told a story to a person he didn't know, about a trial that had bothered him in ways he'd buried. And Emilia listened and thought, here is where it begins. Here is where we start.
Episode 3, Blood Memory.
The journals were inside the walls. She found them on the second night, the night after Aldrich, who had left in the late afternoon with his hat back on his head and his face rearranged into the expression of a man who had not been unsettled, though he clearly had. He had told her to stay in the chamber. She had agreed in the tone of a woman who fully intended to stay in the chamber. She had not stayed in the chamber. She had spent the day pacing the corridors of the castle's lower level, wearing a plain cloak and a hood, and Seraphine's face, which turned out to be an extremely effective disguise because everyone in the castle believed Seraphine was dead and would therefore not look too closely at a woman who looked like her. The servants averted their eyes. The guards looked past her. One lady-in-waiting crossed herself and went pale, and Emilia filed that away with the steady accumulation of data that was the only thing keeping her upright. She listened. She learned the rhythms of this place. She mapped the exits and the guard rotations and the particular sound of the third staircase from the kitchen, which she deduced was used primarily by people who wanted to move between floors without being recorded as having done so. She came back to the chamber at dusk, and she looked at the walls. Because she was a historian, because historians look at walls and floors and the negative space of things. What is absent? What has been removed? What the shape of a missing thing tells you about the thing itself. And the cavity behind the wardrobe had been empty, yes, but the cavity had been built by someone who thought in terms of hiding things, which meant this room probably had more than one cavity. She pressed every stone. She worked in the candlelight, methodically, starting at the floor and working up, because she had learned from 12 years of manuscript analysis that people hide important things at the level of their own hands, not above or below. She pressed and tapped and listened. On the east wall, behind a tapestry she'd unhung carefully from its rod, she found a stretch of plaster between the stones that was a slightly different color from the surrounding plaster. Newer. Applied over something. She got the fireplace poker. The plaster came away in sections, and behind it was not a cavity but a space, a narrow, deliberate space between the inner and outer wall, accessible through a gap at the top where a stone had been left loose. She reached in. Her fingers found a lever. She pulled out 7 journals. They were wrapped in oilskin against the damp. The early entries were careful, professional. She wrote about the archive. She wrote about a discrepancy she'd found in the castle's census records, a pattern of missing children. Not deaths and not emigration, but simply absences. Families who appeared in one census and were reduced in the next without explanation. She had assumed initially administrative error. She had not assumed that for long. The third entry began. I have found the same pattern in the Dusk clan records, not just humans. The census omissions cross racial lines, which means they cross jurisdictional lines, which means whoever is responsible has access to the records of all 3 races under the Accord. That level of access belongs to approximately 12 people in this kingdom. I have written their names at the back of this volume. I intend to watch them. Emilia turned to the back of the volume. The list of names was there. One of them was Mordain. She read faster. The pattern Seraphine described built slowly, almost tortuously, and then all at once, in the way of patterns that have been visible all along, but required the right angle to see. The missing families were not dead. They were diminished, continuing to appear in records, continuing to live their lives. But something in those lives had changed. Children born to these families after the period of their census omission were consistently, completely ordinary. No gifts, no magic, no inherited power of any kind. And in the ruling families, in the court's noble lines, in the decades corresponding to these omissions, a flowering, a concentration of gift and power so marked that it appeared in the court records as mere good fortune, divine favor, the natural flourishing of superior bloodlines. It was theft,
It was systematic, multi-generational, exquisitely managed theft. Someone had found a way to
siphon the gift from lesser bloodlines and funnel it upward. The mechanism, Seraphine called the Tithe. She had not had a name for it when she first suspected it. She had named it herself, with the cold precision of a woman who had spent too long looking at it to still find euphemism comfortable. The Tithe. What the powerful take from those who cannot refuse them. Emilia set the first journal down. She pressed her borrowed hands flat on the desk. She breathed. Then she opened the second journal. The second journal was different, more urgent. The entries were shorter, the handwriting less even. This was not a woman keeping a research log anymore. This was a woman who had found something she hadn't been meant to find and knew, with the clarity of someone who had spent 12 years studying how kingdoms dispose of inconvenient truths, exactly what that meant for her. The seventh entry read, I have been watched for 3 weeks, not by the usual people, the court gossips, the faction spies. This is different. Mordain's man was outside my chamber this morning, and again this evening. He is very good at looking like he is doing something else. I have spent 12 years in this castle, and I know exactly what someone who is doing something else looks like, and this is not it. I am not afraid. I want to write that and mean it, and I almost do. I am something that I am not used to being, which is aware of the precise boundary of what I can control. I can control what I record. I can control what I hide and where I hide it. I cannot control what they decide to do or when they decide to do it. So, I will hide what matters, and I will reach. The modern English came in stronger here, phrases appearing in the middle of medieval sentences, like something pressing through from the other side. Emilia turned to the final entry of the second journal. It was dated 10 days before Seraphine's arrest. It read, If you are reading this in my hands, I am dead, and you are here. I am sorry for that. I would have warned you, but warning you would have changed you, and I needed you exactly as you were, someone who loves the truth more than they love being safe. I know what you are. I know where you come from. I spent a year looking across centuries for the right person, and when I found you, I watched you for 6 months before I chose you, and I want you to know that I chose carefully. Your mother was my first attempt. That went wrong. I am sorry for that too. There are 7 journals. Read them all. The evidence I built is scattered. Some of it in locations marked on the map in the 6th journal. Some of it already moving toward people who will keep it. You do not have to do this alone. Find the Dusk Lord. He is the only one at court who knows what I knew, and he will know what you are not, and he will help you anyway.
Find Rael of the Greymoor line. She came to the city looking for something she doesn't know I left for her. And find the Virith before they move the ledger. You're angry. Good. I needed angry. Emilia read the entry 3 times. Then she put her forehead down on the desk and stayed there for a moment, breathing slowly. The candle guttered. She straightened. I hear you, she said, to the room, to the journals, to whatever remained of the woman who had written them. The candle steadied. She took up the 6th journal and looked for the map.
Episode 4. The Dusk Lord Knows. He came through the window. This was, in retrospect, entirely predictable.
Windows on the 3rd floor are the natural entry point for something that is not troubled by the climb. But at the time, at the specific moment of the window swinging inward on its latch to admit a figure that had been, a second before, 3 stories above a cobblestone courtyard, Emilia had reacted the way any reasonable person would, which was to throw a book. It caught him in the shoulder. He made no sound. He set the window closed behind him and turned and looked at the book on the floor, and then at her, with the expression of a man who was not accustomed to being struck by things. "You threw a book at me," he said. "You came through my window at midnight," she said. "The door is watched." "I'm aware of that. You're still in my room without being invited." He looked around the room. The journals on the desk, the broken plaster stacked near the east wall, the boots she'd pushed under the bed, with eyes that were taking inventory rather than performing curiosity. He was tall and had the particular stillness of something very old in a relatively young-looking body, mid-30s in appearance, which she understood meant almost nothing here. He wore black with the ease of a man to whom color had become irrelevant. His hair was dark, his face angular. His hands. She noticed the hands because she always noticed hands. 12 years of manuscript examination. Had the quality of being very controlled. The eyes were wrong. Not the color. The color was a deep gray-green, striking enough, but nothing impossible. The wrongness was in the depth behind them. The depth of something that had been watching the world for so long that watching had become a kind of permanent condition. "You're not her," he said, quietly, without accusation. The room seemed to get slightly colder. "No," she said. She had decided, somewhere around the 4th journal,
That she was done lying about this particular fact to people who were clearly going to figure it out anyway. "I'm not." He picked up the book she'd thrown. He examined the cover, a court almanac from 3 years prior. He set it back on the shelf in a gap she hadn't noticed it had left, which meant he'd been in this room before. "She reached you," he said. "Yes." "From how far?" She considered him. "From the future. Approximately 600 years. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, exactly. More the expression of a man who has lived long enough to find confirmation less affecting than other people do. He had suspected this was possible. Now it was confirmed. He was adjusting. "Sit down," she said. "Please." She amended the please partly from habit and partly because she was aware that whatever this man was, he was not someone who responded well to commands. He sat. The hard chair, the one she'd given Aldrich. She was starting to understand it told her something about people. Who took the hard chair without comment? Who looked at the cushioned one? "I'm Emilia," she said. "I'm a historian. Medieval history, which is where I come from, what your era is called. I was studying a manuscript that turned out to be Seraphine's seal. When I broke it, She gestured at herself, at the borrowed face and the borrowed hands. She designed it. The transfer. She chose me specifically. "I know," he said. "She told me she was going to try." "You knew?" "She came to my house 4 years ago, with a theory so dangerous she would only speak it in the dark, with every candle out." He looked at his own hands, which were resting on his knees with the precise stillness of something deliberately calmed. She said, "If this goes wrong," and she believed it would go wrong. She had very little faith in the nobility of the people she was dealing with. She was going to reach for someone from outside, someone who couldn't be killed before they arrived. Because you can't kill someone who doesn't exist in your timeline yet. Yes. Emilia absorbed this. Did you try to stop her? No. Why not? He looked at her then, with those old, deep eyes, because she was right. About all of it. I have watched it from closer than she could.
I was here before this dynasty, before their grandfather's grandfather. I have watched the Dusk clan blood memory thin over a century, and I have known it was not a natural thinning, and I did not know how to prove it until she walked into my house and proved it for me. A pause. Her name is Caspian Vale. Is that an introduction? I've been told I forget to make them. Emilia Crane, she said. I'm going to choose to shake your hand rather than think too hard about what you actually are. Wise, he said, and shook it. She made tea because she had found the equipment for it in the wardrobe and because having something to do with her hands made conversations easier. She poured 2 cups. He accepted his with a raised eyebrow that she chose not to interrogate. Tell me about the blood memory, she said. Seraphine's journals mention it, but she was working from second-hand information. So Caspian told her. He spoke the way very old things sometimes speak, without urgency, each word placed with care, as if he had learned long ago that careless words had long consequences. He told her about the blood memory, how it worked, how it passed, what it meant to a people for whom it was the primary form of continuity. Not just personal memory, but ancestral memory. The accumulated knowledge and experience of centuries, carried in the bloodline, accessible to every Dusk clan member at birth. It is, he said, the closest thing we have to a library that cannot be burned. And it's being stolen. Drained. The distinction matters. Burning a library is visible. This is, he looked for the word. The books are still there. They simply no longer contain anything. Elders die, and the memory doesn't transfer. It simply stops. How long? A century. Perhaps longer. The early losses were subtle enough that we explained them otherwise. Grief does things to memory. Age does things to memory. It took decades to understand that this was not grief or age, but a pause. Extraction. The memory was present in the elder and gone at the moment of death. Gone entirely, as if it had been consumed in the moment of the dying. Seraphine thought the tithe mechanism could be targeted to that kind of transfer. Yes, I believe the same. She believed her evidence could prove it. Yes. Is it here? Any of it? In this room? Some of what she gathered, yes. Some has been moved. He set down his teacup. The locations in the 6th journal. She arranged for witnesses to hold certain documents in her absence. She knew they would search the room. She planned for it. Emilia thought of Seraphine's final journal entry. I will hide what matters, and I will reach. She planned for all of this, Emilia said quietly. She was extraordinary, Caspian said, simply, without sentimentality, which made it more affecting than sentiment would have. You grieve for her. He looked at the window he'd come through. Outside, Thornmere's night sky. The moon was 3/4 and gave the city rooftops a silver quality, like an engraving. I have been alive for 317 years, he said. I have known many people worth grieving. I have become very efficient at it. He stood, which meant the conversation was transitioning. She left you the map. In the 6th journal, yes. Then we have places to be. We? She said. You need someone who knows the city as it actually is, not as it appears in your historical records. He looked at her steadily. And you need someone the bounty hunters won't approach without significant preparation. She thought about this. What do you get out of it? My people's history returned to them, he said, and the proof that the woman they called a monster was the only honest person in this castle. That's 2 things. I am, he said, with a ghost of something that was not quite a smile, greedy.
She picked up the 6th journal. She opened it to the map. Heat-activated ink, she discovered, by holding it near the candle, visible as a warm gold against the page. 3 locations, marked with symbols she'd cross-referenced against the 1st journal. 3 locations. 3 pieces of evidence that Seraphine had hidden before they came for her. The Priory first, she said. It's the oldest of the 3. The Priory is 3 days from the city. I know. The council will have someone watching the roads. I know that too. He looked at her with those old eyes that had seen 300 years of people deciding to do difficult things together. You're going anyway. I came from 600 years in the future, she said. I'm wearing a dead woman's face. I have 7 journals and a map and a list of names written in blood. She closed the journal. I'm absolutely going anyway. For the first time, unmistakably, Caspian Vale smiled.
Part 2. What the Witch Left Behind. Episode 5. The Tithe. The Royal Chronicle room was on the eastern wing of the castle's 2nd level, down a corridor that Seraphine's muscle memory knew by feel. The particular slope of the floor, the draft from the window at the midpoint, the place where the 7th stone from the wall sconce had a crack in it that made a distinctive sound underfoot. Emilia walked it at 3 in the morning, with a dark lantern barely cracked open, wearing a kitchen servant's dress she'd taken from the laundry, her hair tucked under a linen coif, Seraphine's face hidden in shadow. The room had been sealed. She knew that. Caspian had told her the council had ordered it locked the evening after the body was reported dead. Locked with a mechanism that would be opened with a specific key kept by the council secretary. Seraphine, it turned out, had anticipated this. At the bottom of the 7th journal, in a pocket sewn into the back cover, was a key. Not the council's key. Smaller, plainer, attached to a small card in Seraphine's handwriting that said, East Archive, secondary lock. They don't know it exists. She hadn't made it easy. She'd made it possible, which was different, and which was, Emilia was learning, entirely characteristic. The secondary lock was on the inner frame of the door, invisible until you knew to look for it. A small, recessed keyhole behind the door's iron hinge bracket. She found it by touch in the darkness, worked the key into it, felt the mechanism release. The door swung inward. The chronicle room smelled of old paper and wax, and the particular preserved quality of a place that had been carefully maintained for a long time and then abruptly abandoned. She could feel the abandonment. The silence was wrong. The quality of the stillness in a room where someone had worked for years and had not returned. She opened the lantern a little more. The room was large, lined on 3 walls, floor to ceiling with shelves, a long central table for working, 2 standing desks along the window wall. The shelves were partially empty, systematically emptied, she could see, pulled in patterns that suggested someone working quickly, but not blindly. They had known what they were looking for, and they had taken it. What they had not taken was everything. Because Seraphine was a chronicler. Because chroniclers understood that the most dangerous information was often not in the document itself, but in the context around it. The references, the indexing, the cross notations. You could take every primary document and leave behind, in the structure of the filing system, enough to reconstruct the argument. Emilia worked for 4 hours. She didn't remove anything. She had no way to carry things safely, and Caspian had warned her that the room was likely being periodically checked. She read. She read and she cataloged in the only place she could be certain was safe, which was her own memory. The pattern that emerged was not subtle once you saw it. It was only subtle if you looked at any single document in isolation. Taken together, the census ledgers, the gift inheritance records maintained by the Accord for treaty compliance, the land and property transitions, the medical notes that the royal physician was required to submit for the Accord's annual health survey, taken together, they formed a picture of a machine. The Tithe was not crude. It was not a man going into a village and stealing magic from families by force. It was bureaucratic. It was institutional. It was executed through the existing structures of Thornmere's administrative system, using the paperwork that every family was required to complete at every census point as the mechanism of identification. Which families had gift? What kind? How strong? And then those families would have a visit from a physician, a medical inspection, officially, for their health, required by the Accord's wellness provisions. And after that visit, the subsequent census would record the family as ordinary. Emilia sat with that for a long time. The lantern burned. She breathed through her nose, steadily, the way she'd learned to breathe through things that made her feel the specific, helpless fury of a person who has understood exactly what happened and cannot change it.
37 years of records. At least 43 families she could identify from the remaining documents. Almost certainly more. She was working from the archive's remnants, not the whole. "You found it," Seraphine had written in the 5th journal. "I can tell, because you've stopped reading and started sitting with it. I do the same thing. It requires sitting with. The scale of it." Emilia looked up from the memory of the journal entry and back at the shelves. "I found it," she said, to the empty room. She was already thinking about what came next.
Episode 6, The Greymoor Girl. She smelled her first. Emilia had been in the market for 20 minutes, buying provisions for the road to the priory, when the back of her neck prickled with the certainty of being watched. Not the vague social discomfort of eyes on her from a distance. This was specific, animal, directional. Something was tracking her by means that had nothing to do with vision. She didn't look. She kept moving through the stalls, picking up bread and dried fruit and a stoppered flask, handing over Seraphine's coin with Seraphine's hands, keeping her hood up and her pace steady. She bought a bundle of candles. She moved toward the edge of the market, toward the narrower streets where the stalls gave way to workshops and the crowd thinned. She was grabbed in the alley beside a cooper shop. Not grabbed, apprehended, with a precision that told her this was not robbery. One hand caught her wrist and spun her back against the wall, and the person who had done it was not a man, as she'd expected, but a woman, slightly shorter than Emilia's borrowed height, built with the density of something that had been tested against hard things and prevailed. Her hair the color of autumn bracken, cut close to her jaw, her eyes the gold amber of an animal's eyes at the edge of firelight. She held Emilia against the stone, and she breathed in, deliberately, in a way that was not about air. "You smell like her," she said. "I've been told. But underneath that, you smell like nothing I've ever tracked." The grip didn't loosen. "Nothing from this country. Nothing from this century." Those amber eyes were very close and very focused. "What are you?" "I'm complicated," Emilia said. "Could you possibly do the grip thing slightly less? I can't think clearly when I can't feel my hand." A pause. The grip loosened. Not entirely, but enough. The woman.
Girl, Emilia corrected herself. She was young under the toughness, 20 at most. Did not step back. "Someone followed you from the market," she said. "Mordane's man. He peeled off when you came down the alley, but he's waiting at the end of it." "I know," said Emilia, who had not known. "You're gonna stop arguing and come with me." "I wasn't arguing." "You were about to." The amber eyes were calm and certain. "I'm Rael, Greymoor line. I came to the city 3 weeks ago, and I have been waiting for 2 of them for something I didn't know I was waiting for, and I think you might be it." Emilia looked at her. "Seraphine's journals mention you." Something shifted in Rael's face, quickly, controlled, but it was there,
She knew I was here? She said you came to the city looking for something she'd left for you. What did she leave me? I don't know yet. I haven't read all the journals. Rael studied her for another moment. Then she stepped back, fully, and Emilia rubbed her wrist and observed the woman who observed her. There was something about Rael that was extremely direct, not unkind, but unornamented. She looked at things as they were, rather than as convention suggested one ought to look at them themselves. The man at the end of the alley, Emilia said. Can you... Already handled, Rael said. What do you mean already? A distant sound from the direction of the alley's end. The specific thud of a person sitting down abruptly and involuntarily. Oh, said Emilia. Come on. Rael was already moving. I have a room that isn't watched. The room was above a tannery, which explained why it wasn't watched. The smell alone was a significant deterrent. Rael had made it functional in the way of someone accustomed to conditions that required adaptation. A bedroll in the corner, provisions stacked with military precision, a small table with a map of the city she'd clearly made herself, annotated in a handwriting that was competent but unschooled. She poured water into a pair of cups and set one in front of Emilia without ceremony. Tell me what you are, she said. Not the practiced version, the real one. Emilia looked at the map on the table. She looked at the amber eyes across from her. She thought about Seraphine's journals, about I chose carefully, about the people she had arranged at the edges of an impossible situation before she'd allowed it to close. She told Rael the truth, all of it.
Rael listened without interrupting. This, Emilia was learning, was not common. Most people, even the intelligent ones, even the willing ones, interrupted when you told them you were from the future because they needed to process the interruption-worthy parts. Rael listened the way she had grabbed Emilia in the alley, with a focused, animal precision, taking everything in and making decisions about it at the end rather than the middle. When Emilia finished, Rael said, "The tithe." Yes, it's why the children aren't shifting. Her voice was flat, almost clinical, the flatness of something that had been raw and had been forced to become manageable. Tell me, 37 children in the Greymoor territory, born in the last 6 years. None of them have shifted. She looked at her hands. Her own hands, not borrowed, Emilia noticed. Rael's hands showed her life in the calluses and the small scars. In the history of the Ashwalker lines, there have been individual cases of shift failure, illness, injury, sometimes just the chance of heredity when the gift runs thin. But 37 children from families with strong gift lines in a single territory in 6 years? That's not chance. No. They were visited. 2 years before the first children were born without shift, there was a medical inspection. A physician from the capital, sent under the Accord's wellness provisions. We thought... She stopped. We thought it was courtesy. We thought it was the treaty working. And instead? Instead, they were taking an inventory. Rael's jaw was set. And then, coming back. The silence between them was the kind that held a specific weight. Emilia had experienced it before, in archives, when she confirmed something she'd suspected for months, and the confirmation was worse than the suspicion. I need to show you something, Emilia said. She took Rael to Dusk.
Episode 7. The Hollow Children. Duskfen was half a day's ride from the capital, through countryside that was beautiful in the objective way of things that don't know they're about to be used as a backdrop for grief. Rolling fields going gold with early autumn, hedgerows thick with the last of the season's berries, roads of packed earth between stone walls that had stood for enough generations to look like they'd simply grown there. Rael rode like she'd been born on horseback, which was possible, given what she was. Emilia rode like someone who had done it enough times in a university equestrian club to manage without embarrassment, which was the best she could offer. They didn't talk much on the road.
Rael was the kind of person who conserved words, spending them only when the exchange rate was favorable. Emilia, normally a talker, found herself matching that rhythm without deciding to. Duskfen was small, a village of perhaps 200 people, gathered around a crossroads, with a well in the center of the square and a cluster of shops on the eastern side, and houses spreading outward in the informal way of places that had grown by addition rather than plan. It looked, objectively, like any of the dozens of villages Emilia had studied in records and maps, except for the children. She saw it as they rode into the square. She couldn't have named what she was seeing, exactly, not at first. It was more a quality of absence than a presence of something wrong. The children were there, playing in the square, doing the things children did. A game with stones near the well, 2 boys chasing each other around the central oak, a girl sitting on the steps of a shop doing something with a length of cord. They were ordinary. Utterly, completely, unremarkably ordinary. For children from Ashwalker families, that was devastating. Rael stopped her horse at the edge of the square.
She sat very still, watching the children the way someone watches a thing they have been watching for a long time and still cannot reconcile. 37, she said, quietly. In this village alone, 17. The others are in the surrounding farmsteads and the 2 settlements north of here. How old is the oldest? 6. They all start to shift between 4 and 7, as a rule. She dismounted. The oldest here is 6 years and 3 months. She should have shifted 2 months ago. Her parents have strong gift lines on both sides. Her grandfather was the pack's best tracker. A pause. She can't hear anything beyond what a human child hears. Emilia dismounted and stood in the square, watching the ordinary children at their ordinary play. A boy with Rael's same amber eyes ran past her, shrieking with laughter at something, and there was nothing wrong with him. He was healthy, he was happy, he was laughing, and that was somehow the most terrible thing. He didn't know what was missing. He had never had it to miss. A woman came out of a house at the edge of the square. She was perhaps 35, with Rael's characteristic build and the amber eyes and the watchfulness. She saw Rael and her face did something complicated. Relief and grief and careful hope, all at once. You came back, the woman said. I said I would. Rael embraced her briefly, with the specific economy of people who are not accustomed to public feeling. This is... She paused, and Emilia understood the pause and said, Mira, a friend of Seraphine Ashborne's, which was not precisely true, but was the truest available thing. The woman's face changed when she heard Seraphine's name. Changed in the way of people who have been told a story about someone and then met someone who knew them. A recalibration. A reconsideration. She came here, the woman said, 3 years ago. She stayed for a week. She asked us questions. A pause. The children were fine then. Most of them. She was building a record, Emilia said. Of what? Of what was being done to them, and to others like them, and why. She looked at the woman steadily. She was trying to prove it so she could stop it. She was executed. Yes, before she could finish. Emilia felt something settle in her chest, a weight that she recognized from the journals as borrowed grief that had become her own. I'm trying to finish it. They sat in the woman's house. Her name was Dessa. Her husband was a woodworker who came in from the workshop with sawdust in his hair and grief permanently installed behind his eyes. And they talked for 2 hours. Dessa told them everything she remembered about the physician's visit. The names of the 2 men who had come with him. The specific day it had happened. The way the children who had been examined afterward had been feverish for a week,
and the village healer had been told it was a reaction to the inspection's preparations. Normal, expected, nothing to worry about. She believed them, Dessa said. The healer.
She had no reason not to. None of you did, Emilia said. She took notes on the inside of a journal page she'd brought, folded in her dress. Dates, names, the testimony of a mother who had watched her son's inheritance drain away before he was old enough to know what inheritance was. Outside, the boy with the amber eyes had found a ball and was kicking it against the side of the well. Rael watched him through the window, and her face was the face of someone doing the work of not allowing themselves to feel the full weight of something, because the full weight would be unmanageable. Emilia recognized that too. She'd worn that face in archives, reading accounts of things that had been done to people who had been dead for centuries and were therefore safely distant. Nothing was safely distant anymore. They rode back to the capital in the last light of the afternoon. The countryside that had been beautiful on the way out was unchanged. The gold fields, the hedgerows, the stone walls. And Emilia looked at it and thought about how much of what she had always called beauty was actually just distance. The ability
To look at something from far enough away to find it picturesque.
"We're going to the Priory," she said, as the capital's spires came into view against the evening sky. "Yes," Rael said. "Tomorrow?" "Tonight," Rael said, "before whoever is watching the roads gets their rotation back in order." She glanced sideways. "You have everything you need?" Emilia thought of the 6 journals she'd left hidden in the chamber. She thought of Caspian's agreement to meet them at the southern gate. She thought of Aldrich, who she had not told about this plan, and who was going to be either furious or following them, and she was not entirely sure which was worse. "Not everything," she said, "but enough to start." Rael nodded once. That was sufficient.
Episode 8. What Caspian Lost. Caspian was at the southern gate before them, because he was always somewhere before you arrived. This quality of being already present, already composed, already at home in whatever situation had been arranged, as if time moved differently for the very old, and they simply had to wait less of it to be where they needed to be. He was dressed for travel, which on a vampire lord looked different from how it looked on anyone else. Dark coat, dark horse, an expression of extreme composure that Emilia was starting to read as his version of resignation. He had a bag. The bag was small and efficient, and suggested a person who had been packing for unexpected journeys for 3 centuries. Rahl looked at him. He looked at Rahl. The specific assessment of 2 people who were both accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given room. "Ashwalker," he said. "Dusk Lord," she said. "Rahl," said Emilia. "This is Caspian. Caspian, Rahl. You're both on the same wanted commission, so I suggest we table the territorial assessment for later." They rode through the gate in the last of the evening traffic. Merchants coming in late, a family with a cart, 2 monks who were absorbed in argument. Nobody looked at them twice. Emilia rode beside Caspian as the city fell behind them, and the road opened out into the dark countryside. The moon was high and full, and by it she could see the shape of his face, the composed stillness of it, the way his eyes moved at the road's edges, and the automatic habit of something that hunted by night, and had for so long, it was simply how vision worked. "Tell me about the memory," she said. "I told you about the blood memory." "You told me what it was. Tell me what it was to you, specifically." She looked at the road. "Seraphine's journals are research. I want to understand it as loss." He was quiet for a moment. The horses moved at an easy pace, the night cool and smelling of turned earth, and something flowering she didn't have a name for. "My grandfather died when I was 41, he said at last, which in human years is very young. But for a Dusk clan elder, dying in his 602nd year, it was not untimely, but notable. He had lived long enough for his blood memory to be exceptional. 3 centuries of knowledge,
of the kind only accumulated by someone who has been paying sustained and intelligent attention for 3 centuries. What happened at his death?
For the Dusk clan, blood memory passes in the moment of death, not gradually, not in parts, in the moment. The whole of what a Dusk clan elder has carried, released into the bloodline. Every member of the line feels it. It is... He paused. I cannot give you a comparison that will translate. There is no experience like it that does not involve the specific sensation of suddenly understanding things that were previously opaque. An entire person, distributed, all the things they noticed and remembered and understood, suddenly available. And your grandfather? My grandfather died in the 53rd year of what I now know was the Tithe's systematic extraction of Dusk clan blood memory. And I was standing at his deathbed and I felt nothing. His voice was steady, professionally steady, the way Aldrich's voice was professionally steady when he talked about the trial. The specific control of someone managing a feeling too large for casual exposure. I waited. The other members of the line were there, my cousins and my uncle and my aunt, and we all waited for the passage that should have come. And it did not come. And my grandfather was gone. And there was nothing. What does that feel like? Like reaching for a door and finding that the door has always been a wall.
He looked straight ahead at the road. Like the absence of something so familiar that you could not have named it when it was present. And now that it is absent, it is the only thing you can think of. Emilia listened. She rode beside him in the moonlit dark, and she listened. My family explained it differently at the time. We said it was the manner of his death. He had been unwell in the weeks before, and perhaps the illness had depleted the memory reserve. We said that some losses are too large for the lineage to process, and perhaps his centuries were simply too many. We told each other things that were not true because the true thing was too frightening to hold. That the memory was gone. That the memory had been taken, before his death, extracted, leaving the appearance of a full-blood memory. He behaved as he always had, remembered what he always remembered, but the reservoir was empty, had been emptied. A pause. 5 years later, my uncle died. The same. Then my aunt. Then 2 of my cousins in different years, and I began to see the pattern, and I began to be afraid of my own death. Not afraid of death, you understand. That is a very different thing. But afraid of what would not pass from me when I died. Afraid that I was also depleted. That everything I had accumulated in 3 centuries was already gone, extracted, while I lived and felt nothing. Is that possible? You wouldn't know? The extraction is painless. Seraphine believed it was done during the Accord's medical inspections, as with the Ashwalkers. A physician's visit, a standard wellness assessment. And in the course of that assessment, something else. Something else. They were quiet for a time. The road curved and rail, riding ahead with the natural instinct of someone accustomed to being the advance of any group, signaled for them to slow as they came to a crossroads. She looked at all 4 directions. She looked up. She listened. Clear, she said, and rode on. How many? Emilia asked. How many memories lost? From House Vale alone, 8 elders in 80 years. If the pattern holds across all Dusk clan houses, and Seraphine's research suggested it does, perhaps 60. He finally looked at her. 60 people's worth of centuries. Gone. Emilia thought of 60 people. 60 lives, each 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 centuries long. Each one's accumulated attention and love and learning and grief and understanding. All of it drained out and used for the enrichment of a dynasty that had given itself permission to take it away. She felt something she'd been trying to keep at a professional distance sharpen into something personal and clear and uncomplicated. Anger. Good, Seraphine had written. I needed angry. We're going to get it back,
Emilia said. Not the lost memories, We can't do that. But the mechanism. We're going to expose it and dismantle it and make it legible in a public tribunal so that it can never be quietly reestablished. Seraphine believed the evidence would be enough. Seraphine was right. Emilia looked at the road ahead, at Rael's silhouette against the moonlit sky. I just have to deliver it. Behind them, at a distance Emilia couldn't see, a rider had turned onto the road from a hidden track and was following them at exactly the pace required to remain just out of sight. She wouldn't know about him until morning.
And this was only the beginning. Everything she has found, she cannot yet use. The evidence is scattered across 3 hidden locations. The man who killed Seraphine is still at court. The ledger, the full accounting of 412 stolen bloodlines, is still in the hands of the one person who knows where every body is buried. The next chapter will reveal what happens when the dead begin calling for blood. Parts 3 and 4, The Hunt and Blood Testament, are coming to this channel. Subscribe, turn on notifications, leave a comment telling me which character you're following most closely, because I read everyone. The Chronicle isn't finished, not even close. Subscribe to Crimson Vellum and join us for Part 3 and Part 4 of Ashborne Chronicles, Blood and Testament. The story continues.